Hey everybody, welcome to We've Got Worm, a Daily Planet Films podcast series where we expertly dissect and discuss the hit web serial Worm, week by week, arc by arc. My name is Matt Freeman, your host and founding member of the Slaughterhouse One, an exclusive club where I hang out by myself and think about doing evil things. I'm joined as always by my potential recruit to the club, Scott Daly. Scott, tell me how you were going to fail the test and die.
Well, I'm doing pretty good, Matt, all things considered. But yes, this is a podcast where you, an evil, no good, horrible, terrible worm expert, guide me, a first-time worm reader, through this Friday the 13th-esque landscape of horrors as I inspect, interpret, and yes, even speculate on what the story is and where it is going. This week, we're back to cover the second half of Arc 11 and to wrap up the 8 interludes of this chapter. And Dr. Matt, I need some therapy.
Yes, I would imagine so. This is a very different arc. I know we say that a lot, but this is a pretty significant shift. We've seen some little dribbles of horror, some tantalizing tastes of the horror genre up to this point. But this week we plunge headfirst into that genre, and I think I'll just ask up front, how did that feel, that shift to you?
I think it felt depressing, but I think it worked really well. I really loved these 8 chapters, and I think the reason I love them is because Wildbow handles tonal shifts really well. He is very good at establishing a tone within the very first few sentences of any particular chapter. So, there's a tonal shift into these interludes, but there's also a tonal shift between each one of them, because I think each one of them is tackling a different kind of horror. And so he has to set and reset tone constantly, and I think it works so well. I loved this. I loved that we're dealing with these horror elements, but we're grounding them because each character has each Slaughterhouse 9 character has a character that we know fairly well interacting with them throughout this. So we understand this on a very personal level, and I think it just makes the horror more impactful and more devastating. Yeah. It was really hard to read some of this.
Yeah, I think you just now drawn my attention to the fact that it also sort of ramps up where the last chapter is the one with the most macabre things happening in it, and I feel like that works because you build up to that over the course of the previous ones, and it wouldn't necessarily go so well if you just cut right from Taylor doing something to Bonesaw being Bonesaw.
I think if you look at the 8 chapters as a whole, you're absolutely right. Everything that happens is kind of prepping you for how much this final chapter lands and how difficult it is. And I left this arc in a funk. We had a 3-day weekend. It was a Friday afternoon when I finished this. I was heading out of work to my amazing 3-day weekend, and I was bummed out for hours. It was really tough to read, and I think that just speaks to the effectiveness of the writing.
Yeah, no, that's. I'm laughing, but really, I'm laughing with the joy of effective writing, if that makes sense.
Right.
Anytime something actually works, I'm like, yes, this is what art is all about.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I know you're a fan of horror, so I was waiting to see when we got to this point. How you'd react to it, and it sounds like you liked it. Yeah,
and I think we're gonna touch on this a little bit later, but the type of horror that I really like is horror as metaphor. All my favorite of the recent horror films that have come out, Get Out, Babadook, It Follows, have all been horror films that have leaned heavily on the metaphor, where it's just they're talking about another subject but using horror as a way to do that. And I think that's what many of these chapters do very effectively, and I just it furthers my appreciation for it even more.
Yeah, it's kind of taking the metaphor that the powers are often standing for, and then it's leaning on the horrific aspect of that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
All right. Well, let's get to discussing the comments from last week, because I think there was actually a lot of really interesting stuff that came out of that conversation.
Yeah, absolutely.
So first, as usual, Wildbow dropped by to offer his insights on the writing process for these chapters. and to make a few comments and ask a few questions. And regarding compartmentalization, he asks, do you guys think there's an interplay between the compartments and, say, what you said about the knife scene where Taylor lied about not planning to use the knife, that she puts things into boxes on one hand, but on the other hand, she doesn't seem too aware of the ripple effects of her actions or the actual perceptions of those actions from a greater, broader perspective?
That was a great question, writer of the work. No, I liked this a lot. I like this question a lot, and that's kind of why I wanted to talk about it with you, because I do think that the way that she can't perceive consequences like ties in directly to her compartmentalization, because I think she puts these things in a box and then she like ships the box across the world and doesn't think about it. So she's not like that decision. She's made the decision. She puts it in a box and she doesn't worry about it. And that worry extends to the consequences of it, the ripple effects, everything to do with that particular decision is removed from her life and she doesn't care anymore, or not even capable of caring because she doesn't think about it.
Yeah, it's almost like, it trips her up because it's almost like she expects other people to kind of keep up with her, in the sense of like she won't get why other people can't separate the fact that she was just going to use a knife on somebody to the fact that she's offering someone tea. It's like, actually that's pretty jarring from outside your head. Although I get, like, we understand her well enough to get that from inside her head, that's perfect sense, because using the knife on somebody is sort of a theatrical power play, and she sees offering someone tea as being genuinely from her heart. But it's like, okay, from the outside though, people can't distinguish that, and people don't have your compartmentalization, so it results in her having a reputation that she has, obviously. Yeah,
without ever actually realizing that reputation exists. Yeah,
right.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And then Wildbow went on to talk about the morality discussion, and he basically says he's always concerned when people take a firm stance on the morality of a particular choice or action in the story, and that this tends to color their view of the work and possibly causes them to resist or ignore certain characters and or miss some of the things that he's trying to represent or do with those moral choices. And I think that's really spot on for that arc in particular.
Yeah, and I think the best part about this to me is that I think we kind of saw this happen in the Reddit thread. I think there's a lot of very important and necessary conversations to have around morality, but I think those are conversations that can never really have a conclusion to them, because everyone approaches things from a different angle. What you think is immoral versus what I think is always going to be different. And I don't think the work is ever saying my perspective is right and your perspective is wrong. But I think the most important thing to think of, and I tried to talk about this anytime I got pulled into a conversation about this, was that my opinion on whether this is moral or not really doesn't matter. What matters is how it reflects on Taylor and what her opinion is and how she feels about it and how the characters around her feel about it. I think that's the important thing. So that's what I think we tried to highlight. And that's what I think, where I agree with him, that if you get too bogged down into the actual literal morality of something, you miss what the story's trying to do.
Yeah, right. I mean, I think it's funny because I think you and I both got kind of drawn into some object level moral discussions about whether something was moral or not moral, when really I think that the meta level discussion of why a certain thing is being portrayed a certain way and why the character is thinking about it that way are more interesting, at least to me, to talk about. But I totally see why people, and us even, get kind of drawn into arguing about like her decision to leave Thomas to die, for example, as being like, yeah, that's something you can have differing opinions about, and frankly there is no actual correct answer to that, so it's an interminable argument.
Yeah, but again, I think the important part is that if you put yourself as, I think this was a morally correct decision and I don't even understand why the character herself had the reaction to it that she did, I think if you take that stance and are so firm in that stance that you're unwilling to see what the work is trying to do, I think you're doing a disservice to yourself, because I think we're definitely supposed to see this as an important moment in Taylor's development as a human being, in that she perceived this as wrong and did it anyway, and I think that's the important part. Now, we can have a whole separate conversation on was that moral or not, and we kind of did, but I don't think that's the important part for the story at hand.
Yeah, and I guess that's something for us to keep in mind going forward.
Right.
Just in case there are any morally ambiguous situations coming up in the rest of the story. I don't think there are. It's all pretty cut and dry from here, Scott.
Oh yeah, of course, yeah.
But yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, so as always, we recommend you go check out Wildbow's full comment in the Reddit thread because it's filled with lots of fun information for fans, including a little vignette where he kind of riffs on a different way that he could have gone, or a different addition he could have made to one of the scenes from last arc, which I was absolutely tickled by.
That was so cool to see. Yeah, it's like live writing.
Right. Yeah. And we also wanted to plug Wildbow's new blog post on how to be successful at web serials, or even just at long-term online projects, which applies to us actually, and we either agreed with or thought it was helpful in general.
Yeah, I think this hit actually at a really good time for us too, because we had a long weekend. I took most of the weekend kind of completely off. I didn't do any prep for this or any and my other various projects, but so coming into this week, I was kind of like, should we push a day? And then I was reminded of Wildbow's words, and I was like, no, let's do it. We're gonna make it happen. So here we are.
Yeah. Thanks, Wildbow. Yeah. Okay. So into the general comments from our wonderful fans. Madness Factory asks, are there any characters that we have seen in the story that you suspect got powers from a vial?
Well, Matt, I suspect that Shatterbird got powers from a vial. No, I'm just kidding. We got that confirmed this episode. No. The thing, when I was sitting down trying to come up with an answer to this question, we've talked a lot about the Manton effect, and my guess would be that if there are powers that seemingly are able to break the Manton effect, my guess is that has something to do with science-created powers. Okay. So I can't remember quite who we've seen with that. The one I remember specifically is Narwhal, but that's just because I love that name. So I can't remember some of the other ones that can or can't, but that's my guess for that.
Okay. All right. Megafire 7 says, basically points out something that was something that I had sort of noticed, but not to the degree that is pointed out here. Basically, that there's a lot to be said regarding the dynamic between Lisa and Taylor in the previous arc. Namely, that Taylor makes things extra difficult and dangerous for Lisa and the mercenaries in the course of their mission, and Lisa just continually goes along with it and covers for Taylor and offers the solution for Bryce that ends up working, and then goes on to help her relationship with Brian along. So basically, just Lisa is really going out of her way to give Taylor a lot of slack, is kind of how I was seeing it at the time of reading. Yeah,
I like this a lot, and I think maybe subconsciously a lot of this was put into my prediction for Lisa's trigger event. We didn't specifically talk about it, but yeah, I mean, she kind of seems to handle Taylor with kid gloves. Like she's almost like she's always going to support her, and she's always like going the extra mile to make sure she's okay and happy. And this is kind of what reinforced my opinion of that she is connecting Taylor to someone in her past, a sibling or sister. And I don't know. I like this a lot. And I think it kind of helped reinforce why I was ready to make that bold prediction of mine that I have a good feeling about, but I have no idea. But yeah, I mean, we do see that a lot. We do see her go along with kind of whatever Taylor wants to do. It's okay, we're going to do it, no matter how crazy it is.
Yeah, that's one of those things that like your brain kind of notices, but you realize only when you read it, verbatim that like, oh, that's what's going on. Yeah.
Yep.
So yeah, last week we had talked about the idea that that Taylor kind of puts people in a box as either being a bully or a victim. And Olive had a comment that I thought was great, and you agreed, Scott, that basically here's the comment. I don't think Charlotte flipped from victim to bully in Taylor's mind. She changed from innocent to useless bystander, a collaborator, complicit, not actively malevolent, just someone who allows bad things to happen. And then a bit later says, this is why Taylor hates herself so much over Dinah. She's letting bad things happen. Imagine if Taylor had kidnapped Dinah for herself. I doubt she'd be as horrified. And that's great, because I think it is probably closer to something like a trichotomy than a dichotomy here, where she even seems to come down harder in a different way on these people who she perceives as the complicit bystanders.
Yeah, I think you're right, because I think Mr. Gladly falls under that third category as well. So that supports that, and I loved that comment, because I think Olive's kind of right. I think if Taylor had been the one to come up with the idea to kidnap Dinah and had kidnapped her herself, she would have found a way to rationalize it into a point that it doesn't bother her as much. The fact that she's the one letting these things happen is really the part that bothers her the most. That's a very perceptive comment on the nature of Taylor. So I like that a lot.
Yeah, me too. Yeah, and I'll try to keep that in mind going forward too. All right, Scott, let's move into the beat by beat discussion of the second part of Arc 11.
It's time to get scary.
So we open with our first look inside Rachel's head. She's running through her territory with her pack of dogs, and she thinks to herself about how all she needs is her dogs, and how she's actively trying to drive away the human helpers that have been supplied by Coil, because when all the humans are gone, she can finally just be herself.
Yeah, Matt, I love being in Rachel's head. I love this so much. I love how we see her deal with her minions. Like, she treats them like they're animals. Like, she's like testing them and waiting for, like, giving orders and then waiting to see them misbehave, and then she's going to punish them for it. I mean, that's literally how you train a dog. And I love that connect. That's how she approaches everything. Of course, she's definitely more kind to the dogs than she is the humans. But it really, like, from the beginning of this, we get like a hint into Rachel's state of mind, and then we explore it further and further as the chapter goes on. And of course, by the end, I'm heartbroken and a puddle on the floor, and it's only the beginning.
Yeah. I mean, that's one thing, is that Rachel's chapter is a lot sadder than I would have expected it to be before going into it.
Yeah. I think the awareness that she has of her limitations is very surprising to me. I didn't expect her to have the level of awareness that she has, and that's kind of makes it even more heartbreaking.
Right. So she's still training many of these dogs that she's with, and she seems a lot looser now with juicing them with her power when they're untrained. She ends up ordering a pack of these less than perfectly trained dogs to go savage a building full of probably bad guys.
Did you read this like free use of her power as just like she's stronger now, or just she's at a level where she's more confident in her abilities? What did you read that as?
So I actually read it as not caring quite so much. Like,
yeah, I guess that's probably it. Yeah.
There's no one around to put her in check, and she's been told, like, pacify this territory, and she's like, oh, great. And like, now she just has carte blanche, and she can, like, you know, if her dogs hurt someone in the past, she would have to run and hide, but now she can actually rely on other people coming to help her if her dogs hurt someone. So
yeah.
Which is so while this is all, you know, she's riding the dogs around, she's kind of having a great time, but she's thinking about how nobody can possibly experience the kind of joy and belonging that she experiences when she's with her dogs, but she catches herself wondering why her human teammates are happier than her.
Yeah, and this is that level of self-awareness that I'm talking about, that she fully knows that these people are seemingly happier, and she's kind of on the outside looking in. And that was very surprising for me. I didn't expect that from her. Yeah.
And then at this point, this actually leads her into having what I think we can safely call a flashback, because she's thinking about how she was completely neglected by her mom as a small child, almost to the point of being a feral child, and then ends up going between a couple of foster homes due to her violent tendencies, and ending up with a really hard and strict disciplinarian foster mother.
Yeah, who kind of treats her like an animal, right? I mean, she kind of treats her like a dog, and I think this is there's a lot of animal metaphors surrounding this entire chapter, who Rachel is, and we're going to talk about that more with Siberian. But I love this. It's of course heartbreaking, but like it's like she never had a chance, you know, like she never had a chance to be a normal human being, power or no power.
Yeah. I mean, talking about characters who who you're kind of made to dislike to a certain degree. I mean, I guess we like Rachel, but our first impression of her was highly negative.
Yeah.
In the story, and now we've been shown what a raw deal she got.
Yeah.
Yeah. So at this point in the flashback, Rachel finds a stray Rolo, who she keeps hidden in the backyard of the foster home and feeds with scraps of her own food. And eventually she has to unchain him. And at that point he takes off and ends up falling in the pool. And then the foster mother tries to drown the dog. And
Matt,
Rachel yes.
If the dog had died, I would have closed my browser and walked out the door. I would not have been able to handle it. I think we already knew probably that the dog wasn't going to die. I can't remember, but I don't remember. But that was tough to read.
Yeah. Well, don't worry, Scott. Several people died instead, so it's fine.
Well, they're not dogs. It's okay as long as they're not dogs.
No, I know. You gotta have a few arcs between dog deaths. So Rachel triggers out of desperation to save the dog, and he obviously becomes monstrous and tears up the foster family because he's untrained and the situation is completely new. And I think we did actually have some sense that this is what happened.
Yeah, we did. Yeah,
but it's good to see it from her point of view and how like fearful and out of control the situation was. Like, yeah.
And the thing that really got to me is like her physical pain just remembering this. Like she leaves the flashback and she's like screaming out loud until basically her throat is tired. And that's like how fresh this trauma is still with her. Like she's living with it almost every day, that just thinking about it causes her physical pain. It's crazy.
And as we've mentioned numerous times at this point, her power has gone ahead and made that as permanent as possible a part of her.
Right.
Yeah, so she ends up having some realization that she's unhappy because humans are pack animals and she has no pack of humans, at least. And then she's even more miserable because of Taylor's betrayal, and then also compounding that because of how she let herself down by kicking Taylor into the containment foam and betraying Taylor. She sees this as like a failure on her part, which really eats at her. Yeah,
I think it never really occurred to me just how much Taylor's betrayal would hurt Rachel. Like I knew she'd be mad about it, and like, but I guess I was selling the character short to really feel like the hurt. And I guess to continue the whole dog metaphor, Rachel's like this abused puppy. And she's like really quick to anger and really mistrusting of people because of the way she's been treated. And it's like she finally let someone scratch her belly and then like got beat up as a response to it. And she's just her whole world has kind of been destroyed. And I didn't think about that, and I should have. But I'm glad we get to see it.
Yeah, that is a really sad metaphor. Thanks, Scott.
Welcome to this week's podcast, because it's going to be sad the whole time.
Yeah, kicking a puppy is just scratching the surface here. So as they're running through the streets, someone shoots at the dogs from a window, and in a fury, she drives her dogs into the building and tells them to fetch, and they come out holding people in their jaws. And this is the first time we see her parse a social situation from inside her head, and it's fairly heartbreaking. As we've said, she can't really guess at the guy's motives, and she continually misreads the man as he tries to like apologize and beg for mercy. She sees him as being aggressive and threatening and challenging her, so she has Angelica crush his legs in her mouth.
Yeah, and this goes into the self-awareness thing that I didn't expect her to like be so aware that she was misreading people. But it's like it doesn't matter. Like, aware of it or not, she can't, like, she doesn't understand what to do. Because it's imagining like every single social interaction you have to ignore your primary instinct. You have to ignore your first reaction and think through in detail every single thing you're seeing and hearing. And it's like exhausting for her. And that's, I guess, why she like pushes away from humans, because just doing that is exhausting.
Yeah, right. It's taking someone who's already has some kind of bad programming in terms of being a very angry person, and then removing her ability to understand social cues. So
right.
Yeah. So it also seems like her idea of controlling territory is something like literally drive everyone out of the entire area.
Yeah. And my favorite part of it is that like she's like shocked that people don't understand how that she declared it her territory, because she's just like, yeah, my dogs howled. If you hear the dogs howl, you're in my place. And like, I got the feeling that she never told anyone that. She
Right.
just expected people to know that if you're hearing dogs howl, this is yours. Because, I mean, that's literally one of the ways that dogs declare territory.
Yeah.
And she just can't understand that they can't understand. And this ties into that tragic awareness. Like it's heartbreaking.
Yeah.
And it all ties into her trauma, right? It all, like, it's just like this vicious cycle. And like it just further alienates her and further removes her from the people that she would need to have any semblance of normality.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Not only did she not have a big, like, Taylor-esque announcement and meeting where she declared it, she just goes around and mauls people. And
I mean, it's probably going to work, though, to be fair. You have like roaming packs of dogs at all time. People are probably just going to leave.
Yeah. I'm not quite sure if that's what Coyle intended, but...
No, I don't think so.
Yeah. So in the middle of attacking these poor innocent people, Brandish and Glory Girl show up, and Rachel almost immediately has the dogs charge them. And then we have a relatively concise action scene where Brandish, what's interesting to me about all this is that Brandish is pretty strong, and we've seen how strong Glory Girl is, but actually there are only a couple of moments even where Rachel seems to be at any risk, because the dogs are so big and there's so many of them now, and they're actually very agile, which is something I kind of forget, that they can kind of jump around almost like monkeys in terms of their agility. So they're like jumping up on things and then jumping down on Glory Girl.
Like a full trained pack of these things is really deadly.
Right. So it ends up that Glory Girl goes over to pick up the injured man so that they can flee with him, but somebody's standing over him, and Glory Girl flees the instant she sees who it is.
Yeah, and this is, like, again, how Wildbow just manages tone and expectations so amazingly, because, like, this is, like, a textbook way to send a quick image to your readers on just how threatening a person is. We know Glory Girl, we know her relative power level, and we just see her, like, run away the second she sees this person. This is our first introduction from someone from the Slaughterhouse, and we are on Wildbow's page immediately with just how terrifying and threatening these people are. It's so well done.
Yeah. So we're introduced to the Siberian, interestingly, the Siberian, as if, the name of an animal, not a person's name, definite article, Siberian, is striped black with white and yellow animal eyes. Striped black and white with yellow animal eyes. So Rachel at first challenges her and doesn't really seem to know who she is, but the Siberian ignores her and then kills, or at least blinds, the dude that Rachel had already horribly maimed.
Yeah, and that's another stark contrasting moment, right? We're about to delve into a horror film, basically, eight independent horror films, and we've seen murder in the story before. We still use murder very sparingly. I mean, outside of the Endbringers fight, there's only been a couple times where outright murder has happened, and it's never been this, like, casual and unnecessary. Like, even Bakuda, for all her insane posturing, like, had a goal for doing her murder. This is just for the sake of it. Like, there's no other reason. This doesn't do anything other than she wanted to, so she did it. Yeah, she's really living up to the animal name that she's trying to cut for herself. Yeah.
So right off the bat, Siberian is doing the dog body language communication and making herself non-threatening, and Rachel doesn't really understand what she's doing, although she does understand that she feels calmed by her behavior. And finally, the Siberian speaks. Rachel at first orders the dog to attack her, but they cause no reaction to her at all. So, Scott, how does this level of invulnerability feel on the scale of levels of invulnerability that we've seen up to this point?
I mean, pretty high. Like you said, we had just this little mini battle, which I think from a structural narrative standpoint served to remind us how effective and how strong Rachel's dogs are. So we have that with she's successfully battling off two pretty powerful capes and then completely ineffective against the Siberian. So we're setting the tone right now that this is very high level of invulnerability. I don't even know what kind of drawback this could have, because I think every Kate power in the story has some sort of drawback, but we haven't seen it.
Yeah, I love this combo of seemingly, off the charts invulnerability with complete disregard for life. It's just it's a great element to mix in horror with, because there is intrinsic horror in a power like that, but you don't think about it until your attention is drawn to it.
Yeah, and it's a really great introduction to the Nine when you think about it, because these are kind of people on a level that we haven't seen yet, and this is like a very kind of easy way to introduce us to these levels of power, with just like, oh, here's someone that's just invulnerable. It's easy to understand that power. It's not too complicated. We get it, but we also get how powerful it is.
Yeah. So overall, the conversation they have is great, and we could go into lots of detail there. But the overall point of it is that the Siberian is recruiting Rachel to the Nine, and she seems to know a lot about Rachel's inner life and is appealing to her desire to be more an animal and less a person. Yeah,
we don't have time to go as into that. We could have a whole podcast talking about this conversation. But I love it. Again, Wild Bow is so good at setup in that we see her have a conversation with a normal human right before this. So we see how she normally interacts with people. And then we see this, and it's a great comparison because this is totally different. And she's aware how much easier it is to read her intentions and everything. But the philosophy shit, as Rachel astutely puts it, is so great. Because we've established that it is exhausting for Rachel to try to play in this world. So like the Siberian's argument makes sense. It's like, if you just like step back and let yourself be the animal side, it'd be so much easier for you. It'd be so much less hard. You'd get hurt less. Like it's a very convincing argument, especially after seeing Rachel like go through the stuff she has in the last few paragraphs.
Yeah. The Siberian's words do seem pretty accurate considering what we just saw of Rachel's inner life and turmoil. And it's not that Rachel has thought to herself like, yeah, I should just completely give up on humanity and become a monster. But you see how that sort of feels like a logical continuation of the thoughts that she was indeed having.
Yeah.
So before she leaves, the Siberian gives her two gifts. The first is waiting for her back at her den, and the second is letting her be the only person to hear her speak and live.
Yeah, I actually give that gift to a lot of people. So everyone listening, I'm letting you live.
Yeah.
The thing about that is someone has heard both of us talk and died before. So, I mean, I'm not saying it's correlation, but...
Can see that this arc has put you in a dark place,
Okay, fair.
So Rachel rushes back to her den to make sure everything's okay and finds that her human helpers are injured, but apparently not killed, that we see anyway. And then inside a box left by Siberian is a wolf pup. And Rachel finds that the pup drinks up her power easily and transforms more quickly.
Yeah, and I love how this metaphor works for everything we've been talking about. Because like a dog is just a domesticated wolf. Like it's bred to be complacent, compliant. When Rachel uses her powers on a dog, it's harder, it's more painful, it doesn't work as easily. Just like her being in society, being with humans, that's harder, it's more painful for him. The wolf, on the other hand, is free roaming, it's easier, her powers work better on it. Being a wolf is just easier for her than being a dog, and that works into how her powers work. I love that imagery, it's so good. And you know, like at the end of every chapter, I think I'm going to try to guess whether I think this recruitment is going to work on the people. I don't think it's going to be working on this for Rachel. I mean, it certainly is a convincing argument for her, but I really do think Rachel is not the lone wolf that she thinks she are. Rachel is a dog, and it is harder for her to live in this world with humans. It is really hard, but I think she is a pack animal, and she needs to be with her pack. And Taylor is part of that pack, and she needs to be in that. And as much as she thinks that it's easier to get out of that, it's something she needs. Like, there's a reason why she's with the Undersiders. Like, she feels a need to be part of something like that. And I think that's going to win over eventually.
Yeah, without commenting on what choice she actually makes, it's obvious that she is not actually fulfilled by being the alpha of a dog pack. She needs to be a member of a human pack to have anything like a. Because she talks about how great it was that really brief amount of connection that she actually had with Taylor, where things felt right, and it was because Taylor was engaging with her, in a way that made sense to her.
Right, and we're seeing her through the beginning of the chapter be that lone wolf kind of. She's not around other people, she's by herself, and even in that moment she wonders, why are these other people happier than me? So like it's not fully fulfilling for herself. And I think she's going to take a little while to realize that. I think she might play on the wolf side of things a little bit, but I think she's going to eventually come back to that truth. And I think it's going to be cool to see.
Yeah. And in the end, she orders her people not to tell Coil about this, which I think is supposed to be a foreboding conclusion.
Yeah, I think so. And I think that kind of ties into what I said, that I think she's going to be dabbling with the wolf side for a bit. And I'm interested to see how that shakes out. But I'm confident in my prediction for the end. But I love this chapter. Like, what a way to start these interludes. It's sad, but like it thematically just works. Like, I love it. I love the wolf imagery. Like, I could not get over how amazing that was.
Yeah. So as we move into the next chapter, at the risk of being repetitive, it is amazing to me how each of these chapters is really its own little short story vignette with its own tone, its own flow, its own unique character with a unique piece of turmoil that's driving them. They're not all capes. They're not all good guys. They're not even all recruits, actually, that we get the point of view from. So it's just, as we move forward, I'm obviously going to be mentioning that fact again, because our next character is not a cape. And I refer to this as the suspense chapter, because I think that is the overriding tone for this whole chapter is nail biting suspense. I think the first time I read this, I just like plowed through it because I had to know how it ended up, because it was so intense.
Yeah,
so you've got,
I think me as well. I think you can look at how many tweets I make on a particular chapter as my first read through, how intently I was reading versus stepping back and commenting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so we've got poor Theo, Kaiser's son, is sitting in terror in front of his TV, and Jack Slash, aka Johnny Depp, is playing with Aster. And he gets tired of that, and he orders Theo to change the baby's diaper, and then moves on to toying with Theo.
Yeah, so I saw Pirates 5 this weekend, and I'm glad I did, because it made me hate Johnny Depp even more. So I hate this guy so much. But I really do love how this chapter opens up. I love, like, it starts with him, like, gripping the remote, staring at the TV, and then the reveal that the TV's been off the whole time. And then this, like, the detail of, like, how he's noticing that, like, the little details of the TV because he's just staring at it so intently. I just love it all. And you're absolutely right that, like, we set tone here immediately. This is suspense. This is fear, and we're in it immediately. I love it.
Yeah. So the Jack kind of goes all over the place with his rambling. At one point, he reminisces about meeting Kaiser back in the day.
Yeah, that was interesting, because he's like, he looked at me in the eyes, so I liked him. And then also were contracted by someone to kill people, and then we killed the people that contracted us. It was a good weekend. Yeah.
Yeah. Jack is very interesting.
Fucking Johnny Depp.
Yeah. So he's not as interesting as he thinks he is, which I think is one thing that's interesting about him. Like, because he's very much prone to these pontificating, monologues essentially at a captive audience. Like, it's kind of interesting to get into his head, because he has an interesting villain mentality, but also you get the sense that his ego is enormous. Like, so like the quote that I'm going to read shows both of those things, where he says, but my interest is in the design of people, what makes them tick, what holds them together. All too often, it's one little thing. In architecture, they call it a keystone, the one stone that keeps the entire arch from collapsing, the weak point. And I'm very, very good at finding those weak points. Can you guess what I'm talking about here? why I'm in this apartment. So it works both to show his like grandiosity and also just is terrifying at the same time.
Yeah, but it's also, I think you're absolutely right that it's not as clever and wise as he thinks it is. Because it's like, yeah, no shit, killing a mother's baby is gonna like break her. Like that's not like rocket science. Like the keystone in architecture is not like a little hidden secret in architecture. Like it's not like you're right. He's not as smart as he comes off.
Yeah. So he shows Theo that Oni Lee is chilling in the bathtub because he failed Jack's nomination.
Yeah, and I like this because I had completely forgotten that Oni Lee was a person that existed in the story, because after that last fight, he just kind of disappeared. But again, we're using, like, it's so efficient how we're using this, because we've seen Oni Lee before, we've seen him fight before, we've seen how annoying and effective he is, and Jack beat him, and he's really not even harmed, right? It specifically said he doesn't have a scratch on him. So, like, we're establishing immediately Jack's relative power to everything we've seen. And it's like, oh, okay. So this guy is not just a posturing asshole. He's actually like super powerful at what he does.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting. I mean, I'm just dropping various ideas here because remember back when they were discussing Jack in the first place, Guru basically said his power is not all that. I think was the quote. And it doesn't seem off the bat why Jack's power would be so much better than Oni Lee's.
Yeah.
So I mean, and I think maybe the first thing that jumps to mind is like, yeah, but it's possible to be really, really good with a very simple power.
Right, and we've also seen how effective it is to for your enemies to not have a full understanding of your power. So it's very possible that they just don't fully understand what all his power entails. So,
that's true.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's very interesting. And I think also Brian's comment was in relation to the fact that he's going to end the world. So maybe in relation to world-ending capability, it doesn't seem all that. But also Brian's just kind of a cocky person sometimes. So
yeah, no, your point is well taken. That in context, he wasn't saying that Jack has a weak power. That's you're right. You're right about that. So his explanation for why he killed Oni Lee is that he found Oni Lee to be essentially a blank slate, a tabula rasa, a piece of paper with nothing on it, a formatted computer, a tombstone without a name on it. And basically the point is that when Oni Lee teleports, his mind kind of gets left behind or something, and his mind does, and he deteriorates mentally. So Oni Lee isn't really a whole person in some sense. So that was why he lost interest in Oni Lee as a candidate when he realized that.
I love the detail here. I love the drawbacks that all these powers have. I think it just adds a level of realism to this very out there story. And I think that helps ground it a little bit. And again, this does double duty. It serves to define more about Jack, that he doesn't care about this person because he's not interesting to him.
Right. Yeah. And we'll see. I'm not sure if we can say that Theo is being clever with what he says later, but it certainly does play to that fact about Jack. Yeah. So Jack tells him at this point that the plan is to wait for Purity to come home and then kill Theo and the baby when she walks through the door, which obviously kind of breaks Theo a bit, and he starts crying. And he eventually asks Theo who he wanted to be, and Theo says he wanted to be a superhero, even though he doesn't have any powers yet. And then some of my favorite lines, Jack asks, "And what would you do to people like me then?" And then a bit later, Theo swallowed the lump in his throat. "People like you, I'd kill, sir."
I love the "sir" at the end because he's supposed to say "sir" to people. Right. I love this idea. I feel like a broken record sometimes, but like we talk about trauma so much and how people react to trauma, and Theo is coming to trauma from such a different place because you're right. He hasn't had a trigger event. He's not. He's a second generation, so when he will have his trigger event, it'll probably be much minor. I would be kind of surprised it isn't happening like right as we speak, and it might be on some level we just don't know yet. But how he responds to this is so different, like than from what we've seen. And actually, I like learning that he's 15. I thought he was younger than that. I always imagined him like 11 or 12 for some reason. But I think that just plays into like the fact that he's Taylor's age. I think that plays into like how much more grown up Taylor seems because of her powers. And Theo's kind of been relatively sheltered, so he seems younger. I don't know.
Yeah.
But I just love that he's going through this trauma and he finds his strength in it. And you're right, he might just be posturing to Jack to make him seem more interested in him, so he spares him. I don't think that's going through his head.
Yeah, I don't think so.
I just really think like he's backed in this corner in this moment of fear and suspense and trauma. He finds strength, and I love that. And I don't think that's something we've necessarily seen as implicitly in this story so far. But I just love it. And of course, Jack now immediately must destroy that because that's
right.
Just horrible.
Yeah, and this is one of the very few unpowered POV characters that we've had in the story. But I can't think of many. I think of Danny. I'm sure there are others. I'm really not sure. Actually, maybe there aren't others. I
think Danny's it so far.
Yeah, and we're seeing this real, like, he's not even mouthing off to Jack. It's just a calm bravery in the face of what he fully expects to be his imminent death.
Yeah.
And it's really nice to see actually in this story that is so full of horror, basically.
Yeah, and it makes you wonder if the act of having powers robs you of this in some way. Because you're right, he is a character who at this point is not a cape. He does not have powers that we know of. So it's interesting that we see this very implicit like bravery and heroism from a person who doesn't even have powers yet. So yeah, I like it a lot.
Yeah. So as you said, this manages to pique Jack's curiosity enough that Jack changes his mind about killing everyone, and he says he wants to play a different game now. He's going to give Theo 2 years to somehow get powers and then train them up, and then at the end of 2 years, either Theo has to come and kill Jack, or Jack will kill 1,000 people, ending with Theo himself.
Yeah, and this is why there are no just pure heroes in this world, because shit like this. I hope Theo really becomes a badass superhero. Like, I want that for him so much. But like this level of like mental manipulation, it just feels like it might be just too much for this poor kid to take. Like, this is like a Saving Private Ryan level of burden you're shouldering on a 15-year-old kid that you just like were about to kill. And I really wouldn't blame Theo if he spends the entirety of these next 2 years like in a constant state of worry and fear and self-doubt, and like this immense amount of pressure that's just been put on this kid's shoulders. I can't imagine it.
Yeah, right. It's like Jack's certainly going to succeed in messing him up regardless of what happens.
Right.
So as Jack leaves, he grabs Oni Lee, who he refers to as a treat for a teammate, which I love because at this point we might assume he means the Siberian, but later we see which teammate it is that he actually gives Oni Lee to, and that teammate does something useful with him.
It's funny that I read that was for Siberian as well, maybe just because that was the only other one I'd seen at this point. But yeah, the actual use for him is more horrifying than I would have ever come up with on my own.
Yeah. So they run into Purity in the hallways on the way out, but Jack is able to escape because he points out that she's weakened by the low sunlight, and that he knows that she's weakened. And Theo also kind of tells her to he kind of waves her off, and he tells her to train Theo.
I wonder, and I'm just thinking of this now, I wonder if this is like a hint towards an additional power that Jack has that maybe expands him beyond the level of Brian's casual dismissal of his power, because it is very interesting that he has this idea of Purity's power in detail and where that comes from. And I know you can't answer that at all, but does this conflict with what we understood Purity's power was before? Am I not understand? Because I thought like her power was like emotional kind of based, like she thought of her kid to fly and like summoned happy thoughts, and like summoned and like bad thoughts seemed to power her in a different way. I thought that's what that was, but Maybe that wasn't just the full story.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if I have any like sense of the canonical answer to this. I think maybe she either needs or it's better if she has some kind of emotional impetus to activate her power. But I think we saw before that she does benefit from having like light exposure. Like when she goes to Kaiser's office in his office building, he like turns up the lights for her, and then she thanks him and she like feels herself recharging from the lights.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah, I just totally forgot about that.
Yeah, well, that was like a month ago or more. So
yeah, I think it was more.
Yeah. All right. Yeah. So we're leaving that meadow of sunshine and rainbows and moving on to Burn Scar viciously attacking Fault Lines Club Palanquin. Never said that word out loud.
Yeah. I don't know.
And so Burn Scar is a ruthless pyrokinetic who seems to be immune to fire and can shoot fire everywhere fairly freely and can teleport through fire, which ends up being pretty terrifying.
Yeah, that's nuts.
Like as the fire progresses, she covers more of the battlefield with fire, which allows her to move around even more. So anyway, it takes some time for us to realize that the POV in this chapter is L, aka Labyrinth.
Yeah, I really like that detail. I'm glad you pulled that out too, because like the chapter starts off with Spitfire. Like that's the first sentence you hear about what Spitfire is doing, so you kind of immediately assume that they're the point of view character, and especially as they're fighting Burn Scar, because it's this natural. Okay, they're two fire-based capes that are facing off against each other, and then it's that slow shift to realize that it's L, and I think that fits like with her state of mind, and it works into her state of mind because things are a little bit more abstract here. There's a little bit more broad and less clear, and that really fits into her state of mind, and I think that's a really cool way of doing it.
Yeah, and in addition to that, as we move through her mind and her perceptions, we get more insight into the nature of her power, which is something you'd been interested in for some time. So basically, she sees into these other worlds, which she thinks of as pocket worlds, and she can sort of draw from them into this world. So in this particular case, she wants to deal with the fire that Burn Scar is creating. So she finds a worn statue of a woman holding an urn and draws the statue into this world. And it's very slow right now because her power isn't at its best, which is essentially because she is relatively lucid right now. She somehow modifies the statue in a way that we don't really understand, but we kind of hand-wavingly understand to do what she needs it to do. She puts some kind of math puzzle in it that will lead it to gush out water when it's triggered. And then she manages to tell Shamrock how to activate it after it gets broken in the fighting. And we finally I think we may have gotten a hint of what Shamrock could do before, but anyway, Shamrock is a telekinetic and clairvoyant whose power is pretty hard in practice to distinguish from just being really lucky.
Yeah. So I love this. I think Labyrinth is fascinating. And I think, like, first of all, I love the power and how powerful it is, but how it has these clearly set up boundaries and limitations. It doesn't seem like she can just create something out of thin air. Like, she has to go to these pocket dimensions that, like, she says she's built, but it's like she has to build them in her mind first, and and only then can she bring them into our world. I really like that detail. I also like how her power is limited by how long she's been in an area. So if she's only been somewhere for a short amount of time, she can only affect a little bit around her. That makes me kind of wonder like how long she was in the mall for before they started doing their thing. Because like it said she was home for 2 hours and she could only reach her room and the couple rooms outside of it. So it seems like she was posting up in the mall for a while.
That's interesting.
Yeah,
but also she was having a bad day then, which meant she was more powerful. So
yeah, that's what I love. I love the thematic weight of this because her power isn't at its best when she's having a good day mentally. And so the closer she is to a fully functioning human being, the less effective she is as a cape. And that goes back to our recurring theme that we've talked about that these powers are linked to the broken parts of ourselves and as she's more broken, she's better at her cape stuff. As she's less broken and she's more human, she's worse at it. And I think that just ties in so thematically. I love it. It's horribly depressing, but I like it.
Yeah, right. So Burn Scar makes her way to where Elle is and into her room. And it's actually, I don't remember how I reacted to this the first time. I'm gonna ask how you did, but like, she's been so vicious and murderous and almost kills, several of Fault Line's crew several times. She's not holding back at all. And then when she gets to Elle's room, she's like, I'm sorry about your friends. I didn't come here planning to do that. It's just,
Yeah, it's a very jarring shift, and it's supposed to be. I was kind of like, what's going on here? And right. Because you immediately think that she's there to recruit Elle, which turns out not to be true. So you're kind of prepping for the worst. And this is not what I expected at all. I think it's very effective.
Right. So it turns out that Burn Scar is another cape, very much like Elle, actually, whose power has ruined her in some way. Or so I think we're led to assume, at least, in that the more she uses it, the less she cares about hurting people, which leads her to use it more, which creates a cycle of her doing a lot of really horrible things.
Yeah, you're right. It links up to Labyrinth in such a really perfect way, but almost kind of foils of each other. Like that, they're sources of the power, kind of, and how it affects them mentally is similar, but how they react to it is very different. And I think that's really important. Sorry, go ahead.
I think that's highlighted where what Elle actually thinks about this, where she thinks to herself, and you retreat into that state to avoid facing the guilt over the things you've done. You use it to hide from your own fears. If I blame you for anything, it's for that.
Yeah, and I really think that's the most important thing about this interaction, and it kind of distills the main thesis of Worm, or one of the main theses of Worm so far, is that, we talked last week about fault, and whose fault it is for a certain thing. It's definitely not Burn Scar's fault that her power causes her to behave that way, but she does choose to use it as an escape, as a way of not dealing with her past mistakes, not dealing with her guilt. It's that choice that makes her bad, and it's that choice that divides her from Elle. And I think it's that choice that's supposed to remind us of our girl Taylor and the choices and the decisions she makes. So, who's at fault, who's not at fault. But it's the choices you make knowing that information that are important.
Yeah, that's really, really interesting, because I don't think Burn Scar specifically uses the word escape here. But Taylor specifically used the word escape, and that's very much similar to what's happening here.
Yeah.
So it's a very tragic, kind of unexpectedly tragic and sad moment, not least because Burn Scar has actually come to Elle in hopes of finding some kind of moment of compassion and connection with a human being, and then she actually is just reminded that she never really had that with Elle, or maybe with anyone in the first place. And rather than then becoming angry about it and going on another rampage, she just acts really heartbroken and leaves without making a fuss.
Yeah, it is really sad and tragic, and I think Burn Scar is very different from the members of the 9 that we've seen so far, and the ones that we're going to continue to see in this chapter. She's the only one that on the surface doesn't seem to revel in this destruction and death. She's conflicted in a way that Siberian and Jack have not been, and the other ones we see later are not. But that almost the story is almost telling us that doesn't matter. Because she's still a part of this group. She's conflicted about what she's doing, but she's doing it anyway. So it's it's the actions that really define who you are as a person. And again, that goes back to what Elle points out about her, that it's retreating into this because it makes you feel better, because it's less painful, it's less guilt-ridden. And I think that's the important part of it. She's really a fascinating character. I'm super into her.
Yeah, I mean, it's really tempting from this little tiny subsection of the scene to view her as a tragic figure, a figure of sympathy. But I think, like you just said, like she's a member of the Slaughterhouse Nine, which are, the worst people, and probably has an enormous kill count, although we don't know what it is. So it's like, we can't really cut her too much slack based on the fact that she seems sad in this moment.
Yeah, I mean, and again, it certainly is tragic, and I'm not gonna putting fault on that. Like you were cursed with this power that makes you depressed when you don't use it, but when you do use it, makes you want to hurt more people, and that's awful and terrible. But you don't have to be in the Slaughterhouse Nine. That's a decision that she made. And Labyrinth even kind of calls her out on that, says you can go to the birdcage, you can run away, and she's like, no, they'll find me, so I can't do that. And it's like there's very kind of under the surface hinting that she enjoys it more than she's letting on. I think that's fascinating. Yeah.
Cause, I mean, and she was in an asylum where presumably she was not a risk to people.
Yeah.
But that was intolerable to her.
Yeah.
So.
And I do like how Labyrinth does serve as the opposite of this kind of. I think it's very telling that Labyrinth calls her good days, the ones when she's the most lucid and the weakest with her powers. It kind of seems like she's aware that she has this great power, but she wishes that she could be more normal, whereas Burnscar kind of feels the opposite.
Yeah, no, that's true. And I mean, we never said it out loud just now, but that they were both in the same asylum because they do both have these somewhat similar mental issues that accompany their powers. So
yeah, but we see here the different choices you can make in that.
Exactly.
Yeah, and I think that's very important and also very sad, but Ella's better.
Yes. All right. So we'll move from there to our next pairing, where our good friend Colin is sitting at his computer and he hears a tapping. Yeah,
I mean, this is classic like horror imagery here. Like someone hanging out by themselves and they hear this subtle tapping, and then the thing comes out of the vent. Like this is, out of all the ones we've seen so far, this is the one that most embraces the horror aspect of it. Which of course means it's like my favorite so far because I love the body horror in this.
Yeah, the description of Mannequin's body is something I kind of want to study for how unnerving it is, in the sense that it gives you of this like unnatural creature. So all spelled similar. All Colin has is the pocket knife sized model of his nano knife, which is pretty much a pretty dinky weapon in this situation. And Mannequin is generally just like a living weapon, and then he just kind of toys with Colin for a while, taking advantage of his superior strength, durability, weapons, and inhuman flexibility to just run circles around him.
Yeah, and I love how Wildbow writes this. I really do, because there's moments that are just like so specifically weird and like otherworldly, and just like how he moves, and it's just like skin crawling, and then like you attach the fact that he's like silent and he has no eyes and he has no mouth, and it's just like it's so visceral and you can just see it. Like if Worm ever gets made into any kind of visual medium, and I hope it does one day, I can see this already, and I just loved it. Yeah.
So Dragon is actually talking to Colin on the through his computer system as this is all happening, and also kind of amplifying how dire things seem. And we get the flavor, the background that Mannequin, formerly Alan Graham, that's how I'm going to say it, was a tinker specializing in biospheres and efficiency, basically solving world hunger was among his projects, until the Simurgh killed his family and he went mad. And now his prey of choice is tinkers who, like his former self, tried to make the world better. And Scott, this is also why we can't have nice things.
Yeah, nice things are not allowed in this world.
That's correct.
I love how it is kind of on the nose, and Dragon specifically mentions it, but that he literally sealed himself off from the world. This is great. It's classic like horror origin story type stuff, but I also really like how it ties back to Colin and his view on things, especially with how he reacts to this, which we're going to get to in a sec.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. So one of my favorite bits of this whole arc is Colin's complete freak out at the implication, the moment he realizes the mannequin has chosen him as a recruit because he thinks they're similar. I particularly like the read that the audiobook reader does on this particular section where Colin's desperate incredulity kind of comes across, where he's like, I can't believe you would think that, but it's like, who are you trying to convince, Colin?
Yeah, I love this too. You're absolutely right. I, I think it's like this moment of realization for Colin, and I think, he survives this encounter barely. I don't know if he's going to survive later encounters, but I think this is a real wake-up call for him, and I think this, if anything's going to set him back on the right path, this is it, because there's that level of implicit implication that if you're chosen by them, you are messed up on some level, is just so wonderful. And it didn't even occur to me until this point that was true. I wasn't thinking through that until you see Colin's reaction. You're like, oh yeah, that really does say something about who you are as a person. Right. And his way of react. Oh, it's perfect.
Yeah. So Colin does go a bit too far in his refusal and ends up insulting Mannequin's family, and then Mannequin physically, basically mutilates him.
Yeah, I love that in his head, Colin's doing this because he knows he's going to die, so he's going to die fighting. But in reality, I think that under the surface, it's because he's lashing out because he's going crazy at this implication, and he just can't even control himself anymore. But he's still trying to rationalize it to himself, but it's just really great.
Yeah. So he wakes up, and Dragon has been working to put him back together and save his life, and has basically rebuilt him with artificial parts. And she intends to keep working on him and eventually maybe give him a working eye and make him even more of a cyborg, which they kind of talk about it. And you realize at that point that maybe Mannequin slicing him up wasn't just out of anger at him talking smack about his dead family, but may have been a strategic choice to literally make Colin more like him, physically.
Yeah.
So at the end, we get the sense that Dragon is going to confess her true nature to Colin.
Yeah, I like this a lot too, because we've seen from Dragon's point of view, and from Dragon's point of view, where there was this she was aware that Colin had this attraction toward her, and maybe she slightly reciprocated it, but we weren't totally sure. And here we see Dragon lose her shit over Colin almost dying. Right. She screams, "I need you." And I think you can read this two ways. You can read it you're the only one I think can help me escape my limitations. But I also think she totally wants to robo bang him. So I think it's both. I think in that moment it can be both. And yeah. I think there is a level of herself that really likes Colin more than just as a tool for what she wants to accomplish.
Right. And I think, as hard as we may have been on Dragon in the past, I think you really do like her in this chapter.
Yeah. I mean, she's kind of to fall into the horror elements. She's the girlfriend on the phone while horrible things are happening to the boyfriend. That happens, I think, in Friday the 13th, where Nightmare on Elm Street, where Johnny Depp is dying in bed while his girlfriend's trying to call him on the phone. So this is tying into a lot of used horror elements, and you really do like her because she's kind of powerless to do anything in this moment. But she's freaking out about it.
Yeah, and it seems genuine, and that makes you kind of trust her a bit more.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay, so we move on to our next pairing. We have nice, all around nice guy Hookwolf training his chosen. So if we recall, he's kind of formed his splinter group off of what was formerly Empire 88, and he's got a few of the capes from that group with him. And he's basically training a bunch of non-powered trainees and filtering them for killer instinct. So we spend a passing moment noting that Storm Tiger and Cricket are still painfully and laboriously recovering from the horrible, horrible wounds that they suffered at the hands of Gru and Skitter.
Yeah, I think this is like one of the first times that I don't really feel bad for anyone in this situation. Like, fuck all these guys. They're all terrible. I hate them all.
Yeah. No, I just thought it was funny that, like, certainly Taylor hasn't thought twice about the horrible wounds that she gave these people.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, so he ends up picking out a candidate from among the masses who he identifies as being good, and asks, and gets the guy to spar with Finya. But then he calls an end to the fight when it looks like the guy might actually win. And they're going to set up another sparring match between a couple of people. But then Cricket notices something, and before she can really give a good warning, Shatterbird's attack occurs, and all the glass in the area, it doesn't just shatter, it like explodes. And it just kills tons of people in the room and horribly maims many more. Like, I think it may even say, like, anyone wearing glasses is just dead. And Hookwolf is injured, of course, but he quickly kind of draws in his flesh and starts transforming into his chainsaw storm form.
Yeah, this is when it like occurred to me just how much glass we have around us all times.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm sitting here now. I have two monitors in front of me. I have my cell phone here. I have two windows here. Like, I would be so dead.
Yeah.
But like, so glass Magneto is like super powerful, especially in a city that's surrounded by glass.
Right. If anything, this is one of those things that makes you realize that if Magneto is as powerful as Magneto is supposed to be, then he's never being portrayed correctly, because Magneto should be able to do stuff like this, but just never does for some reason.
Yeah.
Yeah. So he heads out with Cricket to face Shatterbird, and we see Shatterbird in person. I love her costume here, because she's basically clothed in and has like a cape of shards of glass that she's controlling telekinetically.
Yeah, and it makes her be able to float. It's just really cool. I love it. Yeah. This is another thing that I think would work really well in a visual medium, like seeing this glass. It'd be expensive to do, but like seeing it like shimmer and kind of move, and I think it'd be awesome.
Yeah. So they fight, with Shatterbird using her range and strength to keep him battered and pinned down, but not able to, or really wanting to, exceed his durability. And she goads him as they fight, insinuating that she understands him and that she can give him what he wants. She says that he's a born warrior, someone she identifies with, and he admits to himself that he feels that that's fairly accurate, that he does feel like a warrior. And she says that she knows he wants to bring her out about some form of Ragnarok, and he can only do that really with the Nine. And in the course of the fight, happens to mention that her power was bought.
Yeah, I think that's the first confirmation we've had at a Vile Cape, right? Mm-hmm. Which is what I'm calling them until I have something better. I guess Cauldron works. I don't know. Matt, this is probably my least favorite of these interludes. Mm-hmm. And I think really all it has to do is like my indifference towards Hookwolf as a character. I don't really give a shit about him. And this whole, I consider myself a warrior, so my only place in life is to be warring all the time. That just doesn't really do it for me. I don't care about it. And his whole posturing about like that quote he says, people with a tendency for violence and a thirst for blood just don't thrive. Like, that's total bullshit. Like, literally the city is surrounded by people who are thriving and who have a thirst for blood. Like, and I understand a lot of this is Wildbow intentionally doing this stuff to get it like that Hookwolf has this like woe is me mindset. But I just didn't really find it that engaging. I didn't really care about these characters as much as I cared about anything else in the arc. So I don't know. I mean, I'm probably just being too hard, but I didn't like this one as much.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if you're being hard. Like, I definitely found myself kind of hoping that Shatterbird just killed him. Because I mean, we already really don't like him at all, and it's not like this is one of those chapters where in the beginning of the chapter you're given some information about Hookwolf that you didn't have previously, and you're like, oh, he's actually just misunderstood. It's like, no, he's actually just as much a piece of garbage as we thought. And
yeah, and I want to make sure that it's not just that I don't like him as a person. I don't think he's interesting as a character.
Mm-hmm.
And that's really like I always try to separate those two things. Like we talked about this before, how if a character is a shitty person but an interesting character, then you can find them engaging and like them even if you don't like them. I don't either with this character. I think he's a shitty person and I don't care about him. So I think that's my, and that could be my problem. I don't know, but that was just my reaction to this whole chapter.
I think it's accurate to say that he's the least complex in terms of his inner life. And I think that is, I don't know. I feel like that's by design. That's just
I think it is too, and that's why I'm not gonna. That's why I've tried not to call out the writing here. I think everything that I dislike about him on a character level is stuff that Wildbow's trying to do. It just resulted in a less engaging chapter for me.
Yeah, that's fine. I mean, I essentially agree. You know, I think Shatterbird is more interesting than Hookwolf here.
Absolutely, that was the saving grace of the chapter for me. Is I was really interested in her, and I'm assuming we're going to get to see more of her, because they're going to have to fight them all. But I think she's really cool. Yeah.
So anyway, Cricket kind of can cancel out her power, but not really, and then Shatterbird uses a little bit of strategy to slash Cricket's throat when she's not paying attention, and then Storm Tiger knocks her out of the sky with his wind. And lets Hookwolf get close enough to step on her with his blade claw foot, but she still doesn't really seem cowed, which I think is interesting. Like he's clearly injured her badly, and she's just continuing to, agitate.
It's almost as if she's crazy.
Yeah, almost as if she's complete psycho member of the Nine. So she leaves, or he kind of lets her leave actually. And he decides he's going to go through with the Nine's test, but then he'll betray them later, which is... I
mean, can you search back and remember if you bought this the first time you read it? Because I don't buy it. I don't think he's going to betray anyone. I think out of any of the characters we've seen thus far, he's the most likely to end up actually joining the Nine, but I doubt the betrayal is going to happen.
I feel like maybe one reason why you found him uninteresting is that I think he is just pretty stupid. Like... He's a stupid person who got a really strong like breaker / brute power that most like almost no one can really take on one-on-one, and it's given him a disproportionate level of power and influence, and that's why he's in charge of this gang. But it's not like Kaiser where he's keeping the gang together out of his wiliness and ability to play people off each other. He's just a brute, and it does seem like he would be easily suckered into something, and any plans he has for like manipulating anyone sound pretty far-fetched. I agree.
Okay, cool.
So we move to the next chapter, which is one of the more fun ones for a variety of reasons. I love so much about how this is done. So many different facets of how it. Yeah, I don't know. Yeah,
so that was basically the end of me being negative about this arc for the rest of it, because every chapter from here on out is incredible. I love this one so much. It's so great.
So among the many things I love about this, we first see Dinah's power from inside her head. As she glimpses tens of trillions of universes in a shuffling mosaic. And she notices, emerging from the pattern, that it looks like most of the near futures are ending up with her dead in short order. So she goes into the other room and was still coil about it.
Yeah, and this is, from here on out, I just get increasingly depressed. This is tough.
Yeah. So I don't know if we've mentioned this, but we keep getting these hints that all of these scenes are actually happening at the same time. But one of them is that Coyle's on the phone with someone who is apparently telling him that the woman who was among Hookwolf's chosen is dead from Shatterbird's attack, and that she was a coil plant.
The dude's everywhere.
Yeah, it's awesome. So this. She tells him that, hey, we're all going to be dead soon. Or she tells him, hey, I'm pretty sure that I'm going to be dead soon. And this is actually really like kinetic and propulsive scene, because Coil rapidly plays 20 questions basically to find out what's going on. He's like, okay, who dies? Just Dinah or me? And it's like, okay, well, everyone present in the compound, but not in the whole city. And should we try to leave or should we fight back immediately? Okay, neither of those work. And then you see Coil suddenly knows that it's Crawler, because presumably he used one fork to move away from Dinah and go recon or something. And that's interesting. So we see from inside Dinah's head that the numbers change whenever Coil exerts his power, which is obviously useful information to know and to understand.
I agree with you so much that it's so cool to see how her power works. And I think it's really cool to see how Coil's power works from the outside. Mm-hmm. We see it's not like how Taylor dreamed it at all, which we kind of knew. But I love just this idea that he suddenly knows something, like without even skipping a beat. I'm not sure how he figured out that Crawler was the one that was coming. I'm not sure how exactly he did that, but he's Coil. He knows shit.
Yeah. But I mean, he could have. I mean, at the very worst, he could have just like sprinted outside.
Yeah, I guess that's true. Yeah. The weirdest part for me with this is that, like, if the stuff that was happening to Dinah throughout this chapter wasn't so like horrifying, there's almost this like funny tone to it, and like how he interacts with her and how like he cuts her off kind of as because she always explains things out to the largest decimal point, and he always kind of just cuts her off. And there, like, maybe I'm just desperately grasping for anything that's not depressing at this point. But I mean, there's this kind of funny tone or livelier tone to this that admits this "we're all gonna die" moment, which is I find very interesting.
Yeah, no, I actually agree that there's this macabre humor. I'm going to skip ahead just a little bit, and I don't think I'm going to read this whole quote, but at one point, Coil says, like, okay, what happens if we give him Noelle? And she says, 81% chance that we survive the next hour. And Coil's like, oh, good. And then she like thinks, and then she like kind of uses her power to poke at it more. And she's like, 6% chance we survive the next 5 hours. And I mean, that's definitely supposed to be a comedic beat, right?
Yeah, that's really funny. It is. I mean, like, it's funny in the, oh my God, this is terrifying kind of way. But yeah, I think macabre is the perfect way to describe it. It works very well.
So, yeah, to rewind a little bit, we learn, I think we may know some of this about Crawler at this point, but basically he actually wants to be hurt because he regenerates so well that it doesn't matter, and then he becomes immune to whatever it is that hurt him. And Coil points out that he's probably seeking someone who can harm him, and the only individuals on this site who can harm him would be Sundancer or Noelle. And we still don't know what's up with Noelle, by the way. We keep getting more of these little tiny morsels of horror tone. And one thing I love about this chapter is even in the chapter where the horrifying Slaughterhouse 9 are moving in for the kill, Noelle is literally still kept in darkness. Yeah. If it's like whatever this is over here is so bad that you can't even see it.
You're absolutely right. I love that how that plays off each other as we move through the chapter. It's really great. And I love how we're getting little tidbits of information, but you're right, nothing concrete. We still know basically nothing about her.
Yeah, so I'm skipping around too much, but I'll just pick back up that it turns out that Dinah can do even more than the typical use of her power, which is that she can pick a particular future that she knows is a good future and then look directly at that future to find out what happened, but it hurts her and drains her. So Coil forces her to do this, even though it like causes her incredible suffering, and she like collapses and practically has a seizure. And it turns out that the answer was to go hide in Noelle's vault. Yeah,
this is really hard to read. Especially Coil's like how like cavalier he is to the whole thing, because like they're like, you're gonna kill her, and he's like, no, she can't die. It just really, really, really hurts.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks. Thank you. That makes me feel better.
Right.
The thing that this got me thinking about though, someone made a comment. I think it was on last week on the Reddit that like there's people like Dinah, like Tattletale, and to a different kind of extent Alec, that have like negative reinforcement the more they use the powers, and there's some people that don't. And I never really thought about that and why that is. And like this got me thinking that like whenever you're using your power to like change the way things happen, like you're changing a series of events or doing something, like the universe is kind of pushing back on you. The problem with that theory is that I think Coil should also be getting those kind of headaches, and he doesn't, which either means like I'm totally wrong or his power is immune to that drawback somehow. And then that makes me think that maybe Coil's power is not naturally given, but like a vial cauldron type power.
Interesting.
That's what got me thinking about that. I have no idea, but that's just me speculating again.
So you're saying that maybe powers that don't seem to have drawbacks are more likely to be cauldron vial powers.
Yeah, to a certain extent, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. All right.
There is one beat I wanted to touch on before we go on, though, because there's this moment where, like, after she looks into the future that has them going into the vault, Coil like picks her up, and like her skin crawls at the contact of his body, and like she talks about how like she didn't say anything about it because she's seen every possible outcome where she does say something, and like how numbers shifted a little bit even as she like flinched or like felt uncomfortable, and like how horrible this is. Like this really hit me as I read this paragraph. Like, first of all, the idea of having consequences for everything you do, and you know how it affects everything you do, and you know how your reaction and your choices and your moves affect everything around you, like constantly has you aware of all these things and how like overwhelming that must be. But then also like how powerless she is with Coil, like that she's disgusted by him, but there's nothing she can do. Yeah.
I'm not sure how to frame this thought in that context, but like the idea that she has this ability to look at a good future and then like look directly at it and see what the details are. That is like strictly much more powerful than what Coil can do.
Yeah.
Because like Coil at best is like he's working toward this plan, you know, of running things basically by pruning like one path at a time. But Dinah, if she wanted to, like if she were motivated, she could basically, you know, it would hurt her a lot, but she could look at whatever future it was where she accomplished whatever she wanted to accomplish and just do everything she could to execute that.
Yeah.
So I mean, I guess one part of this that's so painful is that she's so powerless that she doesn't even really try to use her power to benefit herself. Like she doesn't try to escape. And I think part of that is the fact that he's got her addicted to drugs. And he's probably thought this through fairly carefully, actually. But she's so broken that she doesn't even think about the fact that she can use her power to try to escape, for example.
Yeah, but I mean, we've also seen that, like, when he uses his power, her numbers change. So even if she picked the line where she's 97% effective, whatever, he could use his power and that number could drop to 50 or 30 or something. So, yeah. I mean, you're right. I mean, she's just screwed, and it's so hard to read. And I think it's always been clear, but in that particular paragraph, like watching her skin crawl to his touch and just not be able to do anything about it, just like hit me hard.
Yeah. Yeah, no, definitely. It's super depressing. So they move into Noelle's giant chamber, and Noelle is presumably in the dark off to the side in the chamber, and everyone else is huddled on the other end of the chamber, and they suggest that all the lights be turned off so that Noelle can't see them anymore, even though she can still smell them, and she's having to deal with her hunger.
Yeah, this is really crazy, and I'm dying to know what the hell this girl is. I really am. I think at this point I'm pretty confident it has something to do with Cauldron Group and the testing they've been doing, and this got me thinking down a line of thought where I'm going to randomly throw out a speculation that's probably totally wrong, but I wonder if she's like an attempt to like cross like Endbringer DNA with that of just a regular cape. Like that would explain why Leviathan's so drawn to her and why she's so powerful and seemingly unstoppable, but in a new and interesting kind of way. I have no idea on that, but that's just something I think would be fun. That's one of the speculations that I don't have a lot of evidence to back up. I just think it'd be interesting and fun.
Yeah, no, I can see the connections that you're looking at there. So we get a little bit from Sundancer, who her characterization has been sprinkled fairly evenly over a lot of the story actually, but she's apologizing to Dinah for how she's being treated, and obviously feels really bad about it and feels some measure of responsibility because she's obviously working for Coil, but she justifies herself on the grounds that there's some kind of promise that the travelers have made to each other, and that also they're kind of all that the others have, and she can't go against them even if she feels really bad about it.
Yeah, she's basically the Taylor of the travelers, and I think that's like we've been kind of seeing that over and over again. But she's seemingly the only one that gives a shit about what's happening to Dinah, but she feels powerless to act on it, or at least not yet. I'm assuming that the promise they're talking about was that they would do whatever they need to help Noelle. But I'm interested to see what that actually is. I like this character a lot, and I like how we constantly kind of reflect Taylor and her.
Yeah. What's funny is that on this read through, I'm more primed to like question her self justifications, whereas in the past I was like, oh, poor Sundancer.
Yeah.
But we've sort of hammered home this idea of like people trying to get away with bad things by justifying themselves to themselves, that I'm seeing it everywhere now.
I'm sorry. I think we've broken ourselves.
Yeah, it's affecting my personal life. So Crawler tries to break his way into the vault while Trickster is talking Noelle down.
This is so freaky. I love it so much. The tension here, like you have this giant pounding from the outside, and then you have this arguably scarier monster on the inside, like quietly talking about how hungry she is and that she can smell people in the room, and they're all just sitting there and they have nowhere to go. This is wonderful.
Yeah. And we didn't mention that before Dinah had said that there's still basically a 10% chance that they all die if they go into the vault.
Yeah.
So they get through it. Crawler leaves eventually, and Coil sends for Dinah's candy. And then once she's in her room, she makes one final use of her power to see that there's now a 31% chance that she will actually get to go home someday.
Yeah, if you want to know like how much of a messed up mental state that this week's section got me, this moment, like she has a 31% chance of ever getting home, which is like the only moment in this entire section where any sort of positive hope is. Like it went 4%, right? Like 4% improvement. It's still a very low percentage. It's still 2/3 of the time she ends up trapped by Coil forever. The rest of her life. But like I grabbed onto that 4% hope and like held onto it for dear life because I was just like searching for hope in amidst all this terribleness. And that's the state of mind I was in while reading this. It was really, really rough.
Yeah, I mean, this is interesting to me because obviously, I mean, I'm super enjoying this reread, but there's just no way that something can affect you the same way on the second time as it did the first time. And I'm pretty sure that it did affect me a lot the first time, but it's so distant that I don't think I would have thought about it unless you were here to point it out. I think that may be something that people appreciate from this podcast, actually, is kind of the opportunity to say like, oh yeah, that was really impactful. So
yeah, well, this chapter definitely was.
Yeah, and that just because this kind of draws my attention to what you said a few minutes ago about Dinah's power and how it interacts with Coil's power. Like she could actually make an escape attempt and be like, oh yes, there's a 99% chance that this plan will work, and she escapes, and then Coil sees her escape and is like, well, cancel this reality.
Yep.
And that's like a very concise explanation for why that doesn't work.
Oh, it's sad. Poor Dinah. Yeah. Taylor, save her now.
Yes. So finally, not finally, actually, second to last, we get to Cherish and Alec. I like how this one starts. So this is a character who we don't know anything about. We don't know who it is. We don't know what's going on, really. We're actually kind of confused, and it's a cold open where this girl is dancing in the rain, listening to music, and a law enforcement type dude tells her that there's a curfew and asks her to get in his Jeep. And he spends some time on the phone talking about something about fires downtown, which is obviously Brent's car.
Mm-hmm.
And he eventually gets in, and he seems really nice and fatherly, and we really don't want him to die horribly.
Yeah, I mentioned on Twitter that there's something really Whedon-esque about how this opens, because we have this innocent-looking girl walking alone on the dangerous streets. We know how dangerous Brockton Bay is. She's like casually listening to music. I think the natural reaction is to be worried for her safety, but then we do this quick role reversal where, just kidding, she's actually the dangerous one. It was the guy that was the threat all along. That's literally how Buffy the Vampire Slayer starts. But so that's what I mean by Whedon-esque. But yeah, I really liked this. This was a very cool way of doing this. Cherish is a very fascinating character, and being in her head is very disturbing.
Yes. So she hits him with mortal terror and then apathy to make him compliant, which may sound familiar to you at this point.
Yep.
And then she drives the Jeep to a checkpoint, at which point she amps up everyone's paranoia and fear, and then leaves the law enforcement dudes to kill each other, which presumably they do.
Yeah, emotional manipulation, man. Like, we keep harping on like how powerful this is, and I like there's this, again, Wildbow sets stuff up so well, because this is basically a showcase for how effective this power is. We see what she can easily do with these guards, and we see how creepy and terrible it is. And I really like that detail that she reads emotions as, like, she sees it as music, because it just kind of makes it even more creepier, that, like, it's like makes her, like, sing or like she reacts to it as if it's musical, to people's fear and terror, and all the it creeps me out.
Yeah, it's very inhuman. And I mean, we're going to see a bit of this in a second, but it kind of reminds you a bit of how when your power has to do with controlling people's bodies and or minds and or emotions, it kind of makes you become detached, which is something we see from the whole Vasiliev, is that it? Vasily? I don't remember how to say it. Family, anyway, the Heartbreaker family.
Yeah. You know, the thing that, like, part of me wishes Gallant hadn't have died so early, because, like, he's the only other character outside this family that we know, like, deals in emotion, and he was a good guy, and I would have liked to have seen how the good emotional manipulation versus the bad kind of played off each other, and how you use this ability to affect people's emotions for good versus how these people use it terribly. I would like to see more of that. So that's a shame that we lost him so early, but maybe there's another good emotional person.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like a risky thing, because it's one of those things where it's a power that does not lend itself well to being a superhero, almost, because people will get creeped out by it. Yeah, so in her head, we're seeing that Brockton Bay is just a perfect playground for her, because everyone's emotions are so raw and therefore easier to manipulate, and that she can seemingly feel everyone in the city. She has a really immense range, and she kind of keeps tabs on the particular ones, which we are given to understand are the recruits for the Slaughterhouse 9. And we have the buried girl, the arrogant geek, the dog lover, the daydreamer, the warlord, the scaredy cat, the broken assassin, and the crusader. Ding, 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 Scott. Let's play Pick Who Is What. Okay.
I think I'm going to probably need your help on some of these, because some of them are easy. So I think the buried girl is Noelle, because she's literally underground. The arrogant geek, I think, is Armsmaster. I think that fits.
Yeah.
Dog lover is very clearly Rachel. Daydreamer, I guess, is Elle, I guess we're saying.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So the warlord is where we get into toughness for me. Scaredy cat, I think, is supposed to be Amy. Broken assassin is Oni Lee. So it's warlord and crusader that I'm not sure on, because one of them's Alec and one of them's Hookwolf, and I can't remember where we landed when we were discussing this before.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's totally fair to have your own idea of it. I think where I came down was I was like, I think Alec is the warlord because he's an overlord. Like, Lord is practically his name, and Hookwolf sees himself as a crusader for something, even though what he's a crusader for is abhorrent. I think you could make an argument in the opposite direction, but that's just kind of what feels convincing to me. I
think that makes the most sense. If you guys listening have different interpretations of this, we'd love to hear it. I kind of like how that loop's never closed. It's just like a fun little thing you can try to figure out. Like, before I knew who the final person of the arc was, I kind of tried to figure it out from these. I did not get it. But it's really interesting. I like it a lot.
Yeah. And I mean, and you can see kind of like this is part of her power, is she's kind of summarizing these people as a whole with this label because she can feel them so well.
Yeah, and and like from such a great distance, like across the city, it's like incredible.
Yeah. So she arrives at the location of her pick, and she orders the mercs out front to kill themselves, which they do, although it takes a while and is kind of horrible to watch. And then inside is Alec, her brother, which, I mean, this is all played as a surprise the first time you're reading it because you don't know who she is, really. And so when Alec recognizes her, that's finally when you kind of get who she is. I believe that's how things unfold.
Yeah, I mean, as soon as I saw the emotional powers, I knew she was going to be connected to Alec, in that Alec would probably be her recruit, but the loop of this is someone who related to her didn't close until this moment for me. So yeah, this was a reveal.
Yeah, I don't remember what I thought, but the way her power seems to be described seems very similar to how Heartbreaker's power was described to us in the past.
Yeah.
So inside, she tries to turn the people in the room against him, but he's already controlling them, so it doesn't work.
Yeah, this is really casually fed to us, right? Alec is just controlling people now. So whatever made him stop when he first got to Brockton Bay, he fell off the wagon when he did Sophia, and he's just doing it all the time now. And it makes you wonder, do you think that if the rest of the Undersiders are aware of this, and how they would react to it if they were aware of this? And I like how it's given casually here, because of course from the perspective of Cherish, it's not a big deal to her, but it's really interesting information.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like it would be really hard for him to single-handedly hold the territory with his making people drop things power.
Yeah, I mean, that's fair, but he's still doing terrible things.
Right.
I don't like it.
Not to forgive it, just to say like it from his perspective, he's like, well, what else am I supposed to do? So they're basically at a stalemate because their powers they're sort of semi-immune to each other's powers in different ways. And part of that is just the nature of the powers, I think. And part of it is because they've actually spent a lot of time practicing on each other. And so they're just sort of inured. So it turns out that she was frustrated that her father never made a push for real control. And that they're, basically my interpretation is that there are 10 or so Cape kids of Heartbreaker, with 3 of them able to control people one way or another, 4 if you count Alec. But that even with all this power, Heartbreaker just wanted to go kidnap a movie star to add to his harem, and this basically resulted in the heartbroken losing so many people that are basically losing so much control that they threw away their shot at Empire. So part of the reason she's joined the 9 is that after she left, 2 of her brothers are trying to come after her to bring her back, and she's kind of in it for the protection. And in order to get in, apparently she took out Hatchet Face, who is a power nullifier, because her range exceeds the range of his nullification field.
Yeah. So Matt, I love this back and forth, like, sibling argument that happens. It's kind of this sibling spat that's going on, but Alec's 3 guards are just standing there the whole time. Yeah. And we know that they're fully aware of what's going on. We know that they're conscious and they feel emotions, but they can't do anything. So they're both physically unable to move their body. Also, at the same time, Cherish is emotionally assaulting them with terrible emotions to try to control them. And they're just having to sit there and take all this and they can't do anything about it. It's
Right.
like so horrifying.
Yeah. At worst, they're like standing there sweating and shaking while these two siblings just natter back and forth.
It's funny because I mentioned this on Twitter and someone responded with, well, if Alec wasn't controlling them, they would have just committed suicide. It's like, that's like putting a silver lining on a fucking hurricane. It's like, okay, yeah, I mean, you're right, but Jesus Christ.
Yeah, like we're assuming that they actually walk away from this when their like minds haven't melted. So he kind of reveals he can probably hijack her body actually, but then she reveals that she has a bomb on her person that she has to keep resetting in order to not blow her up and everyone around her.
Yeah, this is really interesting character development. I kind of wonder what like this bomb is specifically meant to stop, and part of me thinks it may be designed to counter Alec himself. It seems like super risky, and she's super casual about it. Like her phone literally dies. The only way to stop herself from blowing up dies, and she's just like, that's inconvenient. I guess I'll go do something about that in a few minutes. And I guess it gets you into her character and her point of view.
Yeah, she reminds you of Alec in a very different way in her just like detachment and affectlessness, which actually segues nicely into the fact that when she tells Alec that she's nominating him for the 9, and it's for such a petty reason, it's like, well, you left and it made my life worse, so now I'm going to ruin your life, and Alec's reaction is like you can kind of imagine. I don't know. For some reason, I find it very amusing to imagine him being like, "Oh man, you really screwed me over here, sis." And like, actually, for Alec, this is like the equivalent of like screaming and throwing things. Yeah, because like he's actually having an emotional reaction that he's showing, which means he's freaked out.
Yeah, it's these two emotionally detached people having an argument. So, like, you're right. You're absolutely right. And it's really good. I like that every single person has their own personal reasons for nominating someone, and only like half of them are because we think this guy would actually make a good spot on our team. It's just mostly to fuck with people.
Right.
I really like that a lot. I was a little surprised that Alec, like, his reaction to the offer is so like immediate and like, no, I don't want to do this. When I originally predicted that this entire Slaughterhouse 9 was there to recruit him, which I got a little wrong, but I didn't expect him to ever actually join, but I expected like it to be somewhat of a temptation for him, and he doesn't even like take a beat to consider it. And you're right, he's freaked out by the idea of it. So I think I'm just kind of selling Alec short again, that he's not as bad as sometimes he's perceived, and that even he has a line, and this is beyond it.
Yeah, I think he fairly explicitly tells us, like, sis, you're in over your head here. These people are monsters.
Yeah.
And he knows that he's not like that. He's not that caliber of creature, or whatever is wrong with him. Or at least that's what he wants to believe, I guess. Yeah, so as she leaves, Cherish thinks about how she's been very, very subtly making the other members of the 9 addicted to her. At least that's how I parse what she's describing, and that soon they'll be wrapped around her finger.
Yeah, this is a really super stable group of people that I definitely want to join and hang out with. It's really great.
Yeah, I'm sure that if they lived long enough, they would all die of like heart disease from this chronic stress of being around each other. All right, now we end with everyone's favorite Slaughterhouse 9 member.
Okay, so I've been dreading this conversation since we started. I really have.
Okay.
I think this is one of the most tragic and yet beautiful things I've read. Like we talk up Wildbow's writing a lot in this podcast, and obviously we're big fans, or we wouldn't be talking about it for 2 hours and 15 minutes every week. But this chapter, the construction, I'm not just talking about the events of the chapter, but the writing itself, the order of how things happen, how they're described, the tone, the pace, this just beautifully crafted little mini vignette of a story is incredible. It's incredible. I love this chapter so much, and it breaks my heart, and it bummed me out, and it's so many different emotions, but it is near perfect.
Yeah, I agree. I'm just gonna go into it, and I'll talk about what I love as we're going.
All right.
So Panacea, Amy Dallin, finds Dragon's letter that she had sent to Brandish in the New Wave household, and immediately learns that her father is the supervillain Marquis, which, yes, everyone, I'm going by the pronunciation guide for the audiobook, which says Marquis.
We looked it up in a dictionary, guys.
We looked it up.
A real dictionary.
Thank you. Thank you. Moving on. so she takes this about as well as you would expect.
Yeah, and especially based on what we know of her so far, this girl who's never known her family, who's always felt kind of like an outsider, always felt that on some level there was something wrong with her. She, gifted, with this great power to help people, but has always had this suspicion that there was like this darkness behind it. And so every time she was too tired to help someone, every time she was unable to help someone, every time she just didn't want to do it, she just wondered if it's because of this thing that's wrong with her. And now she's already at a low point, and she reads this, and it's basically her worst nightmare coming true, all at once. That yes, she is the offspring of a monster, and therefore could be a monster herself. And it's so hard. We start off with a bang like that, and I am already depressed.
Yeah, and this is before we even move into how horrible her home life is now.
Yeah.
Because we're showing Lori Girl and Brandish are leaving to deal with the Howling, which is obviously the first chapter, which is a nice little circle there. And they're leaving her to look after Mark, aka Flashbang. And they're being really cold to her, especially Brandish. Lori Girl is being just more uncomprehending about things. And we don't really realize why at this point. But basically he's injured, he's brain damaged, in a way that makes him kind of lose his physical skills. He can't really control his body very well or do basic things, but he still has his mind. And Panacea can't or won't help him, and it's very gradually doled out to us exactly what's going on with that. But regardless, Amy insists that she shouldn't heal his brain, that it's a line that she shouldn't cross, and they don't understand, and it's kind of tearing the family apart. And we don't really understand either at this point, not quite.
Yeah, I agree. And again, it goes into how brilliant this chapter is, because my initial reaction was just heal him. And then the more you're with Amy, the more you understand how terrified of her power she is, and how much she kind of hates her power. And she can't explain why to anyone else, let alone fully admit it to herself. And the only reason we even kind of get it is because we're inside her brain, and that's it. Yeah. And oh man, this is so depressing.
Yeah, I mean, I'm trying not to be leading here, but I think this chapter highlights what I'm about to say anyway, which is it's kind of misleading to even refer to her as a healer. If you were to describe her power, you wouldn't necessarily say, "Oh, she's a healer." She can heal, but she can do. I mean, we don't even know what else she can do.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. Which, I mean, Bonesaw basically just says this outright. She's like, "Oh no, you can do all this other stuff that has nothing to do with, bringing a person's body back into its nominal physical parameters."
Yep.
So she decides that she is going to heal Mark because she just can't take it anymore, even though it breaks her rules. But then immediately afterwards, she's going to just leave the family. She's just going to pack a bag and walk out the door and leave. So having made this decision, knowing she's going to have to work herself up to it, but she's made the decision, she comes back into the room, and there's a girl there looking about 5 years younger than Amy, who we have to consider she's 16 or something. And Mark knows who this is, and there's this extremely sad image of him struggling to stand, but he can't.
Yeah, and we start off the chapter in just kind of this standard character drama where we're dealing with Panacea and her internal conflict. But then with this moment, it morphs into full-on horror, and that's kind of where we are for the rest of the chapter. And this is really where I thought the horror metaphor really landed the most. And I love it. I love it so much. I love how Bonesaw relates to Amy. I love how her pushing her to reveal stuff about herself presents this metaphor to us throughout the chapter. It's just so well done. Like I'm just gonna be gushing about this chapter throughout it all because it's just so well done. It's so well executed.
Yeah, that's okay with me. So she notices. So the description. I'm just gonna point out the description of Bonesaw is fantastic. That she's just like in this bloodstained apron and has like perfectly coiffed ringlets, but everything else about her is like dirty and bloodstained. And has like tons of surgical tools at her belt. And then behind Amy is Hatchet Face. But then Hatchet Face teleports to get ahead of her when she tries to run. And while the first Hatchet Face dissolves in a way that we've seen elsewhere. And we realize that it's not Hatchet Face, it's Hack Job, which is Oni Lee and Hatchet Face mashed together. I just love Bonesaw's creative names.
Oh, do you, Matt? Do you love them?
Yeah, they're so delightful.
And she's really on a whole nother level, right? And that's what we were talking about, that we've been mentally prepping for this moment throughout the last 7 chapters, to get to this level of horror and scariness. And I love that this uses like that little girls are scary imagery. Because Bonesaw isn't just this disgusting, horrible monster who can create other disgusting, horrible monsters. She's a cute little girl, disgusting, horrible monster who creates other little monsters. It's like if one of the twins from The Shining woke up one morning and then decided to turn into a fucked up Frankenstein. Yeah. It's so visceral. I love it. I'm terrified by it, but I love it.
She fiercely chastises people for swearing on top of all that.
Yeah.
So, again, we've mentioned this before, but the 9 are largely going after kindred spirits, or at least people who they see as being kindred spirits. So usually this horrifies the person they pick, because it's implying that the person is a monster. And this is exactly not what Panacea needs right at this moment, is to have someone else who works with quote unquote meat show up and tell her that we're the same.
Yeah, I love this. It never occurred to me to have like a tinker that works with biology, instead of a tinker that works with technology, and it's so interesting. And it's like it's these things like, of course it makes sense, but it's something that would have never occurred to me. And I just love that it occurred to Wildbow. This is really interesting and horrifying, of course, but I like it a lot.
Yeah. I hope he never writes an entire web serial where every character is Bonesaw. I
feel like you're hinting something that I don't understand. I don't appreciate it, Matt.
Just gonna let that pass. It's about Twig.
The stick one. I got it.
Yeah. So little vignette aside, where Bonesaw describes the origin of Murder Rat, was one of those things where your brain just whelps right into a whole nother tonal neighborhood relative to the prior arcs in particular.
Yeah, that was awful. Oh my god! Like, wasn't it that someone hired her to kill I forget
Mouse Protector.
Mouse Protector, yeah.
Ravager hired her to kill what is essentially a Mickey Mouse themed cape. She didn't kill. She just mashed her together physically with the one who asked her to kill her into a horrifying, like, rodent person.
Oh my god.
Yeah, I mean it's really a very different thing that we're introducing in the story now.
Yeah, no,
and I love that
it
works.
Yeah, it does work. It works so well. That's the amazing part about this is it feels like a natural extension of the things we've seen in the story, but it still elevates it to a whole nother level. It never feels like we're jumping this just for the sake of story. It makes sense within the story, but Jesus Christ, it's terrifying.
Yeah. So yeah, Bonesaw brings in some of her other creations, and she elaborates that she would love to work with Panacea because they could make even cooler monstrosities together. And Amy says she's not up for it, and Bonesaw says, well, we can work on that. And a bit later on in the chapter, she elaborates, like, hey, we can make one super person out of 100 capes and stop an Endbringer. And man, that's really running with this theme of, like, the ends justifying the means and stuff like that we've talked about before. Where
it's almost as if it's one of the main unifying themes of the entire novel.
Yeah. I don't know. It's probably a coincidence.
But again, the reason this works is because on the macro level, that is a main unifying theme. But on the micro level, it works here too, because Amy is this scared 16-year-old girl who's always feared what she really is and always felt unwelcome in her home, who's never really had a family. And she's never felt like she could be honest with her family about what she is or what she feels like she is. And then she's got this person who basically says, I want you to be my sister. I am fully embracing what you are, even though you're scared of it. And you can see that there's a part of her that would maybe find this appealing on some level. Certainly as we get into the points where she breaks her over these next few paragraphs, but like it just like she's appealing to her on this level that, from Amy's perspective, on some level could be very attractive.
Yeah, I think that's a great thing to point out, that this person is literally asking her to be like her sister.
Yeah,
which is something she's extremely vulnerable to in this moment, where she feels like she's lost or is losing her other sister. So yeah, Bones, again, like you just mentioned, now she's like, okay, that's fine, I'll just break you, because Bonesaw claims to be Jack's protege, and harkening back to what he said about finding the keystone, she wants to find Amy's breaking points the way Jack does, and so first she has Murder Rat attack her and makes Amy take her apart physically, like kind of from the inside, on threat of injury to herself and Mark if she fails. And then after she does this, she has Pagoda attack with the same threat, basically. And because Pagoda regenerates, Amy, basically, it's either kill him or nothing else will work. So I think she sort of accidentally kills him, but she definitely kills him.
Yeah.
So there's in the midst of all this, I'm not gonna read the full quote, but there's Bonesaw basically demonstrates that she actually seems to understand where powers come from better than like anyone in the whole story, and it's because she's like captured people and hooked them up to computers and monitored them while inducing the kinds of stress that cause trigger events. So like she understands Panacea's power maybe better than Panacea does, and maybe even understands the idea of powers better than anyone else. I mean, that's certainly anyone else that we've seen, I think.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of information here, and I don't think we have time to go into all of it yet, but I'm sure this is going to come up again. The thing that really stood out to me was the idea that powers being given to people who have trigger events is like a mistake. I think this works for cool story reasons, but I think it also works metaphorically as the powers being like a response to trauma. These things aren't supposed to happen, and in like a perfect world they wouldn't happen, but this isn't a perfect world. This is a world where people treat each other like shit and force each other in these extreme emotional situations that result in these mistakes that give people superpowers, and I love that thematic imagery.
Yeah. So in the final step to break Amy, Bonesaw has one of her little spider robots jump on Mark and inject acid into his brain, and now Panacea has to heal his brain or he'll just die. So she heals the injury, and then she heals him completely, and almost immediately he springs into action, fighting off Bonesaw's creations.
Yeah, and this was kind of very surprising to me, because I always thought her rationale for not healing brains was specific to the complicated nature of the human mind, and how getting in there and messing with it could potentially be dangerous. But it's very clear here that that's not the case at all, that she very easily does this, that it's very simple for her to go in and just put his brain back to normal.
Yeah.
So the real reason is something much deeper, much more complicated and ingrained in her persona, and we're gonna see that here in a few minutes. But that was a very interesting reveal for me. It really got me thinking, and then it's like everything lands in the final moments of the chapter, and you're like, oh, I get it now. This is incredible.
Yeah, right. It's so complex, and it harkens back to the first couple of times we saw this character and a lot of her character decisions that she's made. We're not there quite yet, though. So Bonesaw leaves. Mark's. It would be flattering to Mark to say that he scared her off. I think she just left because her point was made.
Yeah, she broke her and didn't need to be around anymore.
Right. And then Mark pretty unhesitatingly just euthanizes murder rat / mouse protector.
Yeah, I appreciated this moment at least, though. I don't think there's a lot you could do for poor mouse protector at this point, especially like knowing that she was conscious throughout the whole thing.
Right.
That's.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess I just thought it was almost a perfect capstone to this scene where this hero like blows a person's chest apart and blood sprays everywhere, and it's like that was the hero taking action.
Yeah. I guess it was a rather violent way of euthanizing someone.
Yeah. So Panacea pretends to go to the other room to rest, but actually she just packs a bag and leaves. And she's hiking through this dangerous city now, and Victoria catches her pretty quickly because she's Victoria. And Amy still refuses to talk about why she hadn't healed Mark before. And she tries her best to rebuff her sister and just get her to leave her alone and she, above all, not to touch her. And Victoria just kind of bowls through all of her protestations and finally gives her a hug. And Amy uses her power somewhere between conscious and unconsciously and changes something in Victoria. And what she did is she made Victoria reciprocate her romantic feelings.
And this is where everything lands, and this is when it becomes basically a masterpiece for me, because this last piece of this puzzle that is Amy clicks into place, and suddenly we see everything. And I didn't see this coming. I really didn't. And so suddenly, like, we realize that Amy is gay, and she's been dealing with this her entire life. And I think her fear of who she is and her fear of her powers works metaphorically with this, but I think they work independently as well. Like, she can both be terrified of who she is as a person from her sexual orientation, and how that deals with the fact that she's romantically interested in what is ostensibly her sister, while also being afraid of her powers. I think the great thing about metaphor is that it can be both things and the same thing at the same time. One can represent the other while still being its own thing, and I think that's what happens here is that her fear of her powers is a metaphor for her fear of being true to herself and who she is, but also it's just a plain fear of her powers from her past. And I love this. It's so complicated. It's so deep. It's so but clearly revealed to you in that moment. Like, it's like everything was leading up to it. It's so good. Yeah.
My favorite line about this whole chapter almost, I think, is where I didn't pull it out, but it's how it's described when she actually does the act of modifying Victoria's mind, because it's not really a conscious choice, but it's also not like an involuntary reflex. It's like it's something that she wants to do so badly, and she's wanted for so long, that even though she knows it's the wrong thing, she can't stop herself.
Yeah.
And she really tried hard to say, no, please leave me alone, don't touch me. And she just was at her absolute last thread. And I think that's realistic, because that just feels very psychologically realistic to me. And it's hard to actually hold it against her, because she really did give Victoria quite a bit of pushback.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And Man, I mean, I do agree. I love the idea that it's both conscious and unconscious, and I love the idea that like the reason why she set up these rules for herself is because this is a line she never wanted to cross, and she was terrified that by even just healing a person's mind would open herself up to being able to do this easier and easier. And we see that she was kind of right, that her first reaction to that, her first after crossing that line, is to doing the thing that she wanted to do for so long but never let herself do. And I mean, it's so sad. Like, she's just broken now. Like, Bonesaw broke her.
Yeah. And I mean, she was right all along also. She was right to not, and no one listened to her. And even you as the reader, like you said, you're like, come on, what's the big deal? Just heal his brain. You can heal his brain.
Yeah.
And only after it's too late do we understand that she was right, which is probably a metaphor for everything in human life.
Yeah, but I love how like it works on so many levels, and I was trying to articulate that, and I don't know if I did a good job, but I love how you can look at this as an entire metaphor for her coming to terms with her sexuality. But you can also look at it independently as just dealing with her powers, and it can work on both levels, and it does work on both levels, and that's good writing, and that's why I think this works so well.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how Wildbow sits down and thinks these things up, but there is no more perfect way of enmeshing the character's personal situation with the dynamics and complexities of the power that person gets. This may be the best example of that in the story. At
least as far as I've seen, I absolutely think it is. I love this.
So even after all this, even after she does it, she immediately begs to be allowed to reverse it. But Victoria is too disgusted by it and by all the implications of it, and she leaves after verbally savaging her sister. Yep,
and that's the end of Amy, at least for now. I still don't think Amy would ever join the Slaughterhouse 9. Even as broken as she is in this moment, I don't think that's something she could bring herself to do. I think it's a bridge too far. But I think as a human being, Amy is now broken, and I don't know how she's going to be able to get over this ever.
Yeah. All right, on that cheerful note.
Hooray.
I mean, yeah, this is a fantastic arc, and it's once again, I mean, it reminds me of the Ward's arc, where, I mean, on the superficial level, that it's taking a series of vignettes from the perspectives of different characters who we haven't necessarily got to spend much time with yet. But it's also shifting the tone of the story in a horror direction. It's introducing what I think we can safely assume are going to be villains for the upcoming however long.
Yeah, and I think to tie it back to our protagonist, I think this kind of shows the end of a certain path. The Slaughterhouse 9 are the end of a certain set of decisions that turns you a certain way. And we both, with the fact that we're seeing them recruiting people, we get to both see the beginning of the path and the end of the path all at once. And we get to see how this relates to Taylor and how it relates to what Taylor is, the decisions Taylor's making and what Taylor's doing. I do find it very interesting that Taylor wasn't recruited. I think as a writer, it would kind of be like something you want to do is make one of your protagonists the recruit, but I almost like it better that was not the case, because I think that allows Taylor to view this from an external perspective, and I think she can get growth from this. But you're right. I love everything in this arc. I love how all these little mini stories matter on their own, but they matter in relation to the entire story. They matter in relation to our protagonist. It's so good.
Yeah, I will say that I was like just assuming that Taylor. I was like, of course Taylor's going to be the last arc or the last chapter.
It seems so obvious, right?
That's how you do that. And then it's not that I was disappointed that she wasn't. Actually, it completely makes sense to do it, differently than the obvious. I mean, I'll never criticize a writer for not doing the obvious thing.
Right.
Yeah. All right, Scott. Well, I think that wraps up our beat by beat discussion. Would you like to go into some speculations?
I certainly would. We're going to run over, but that's okay.
That's okay.
So I just want to fill in on some of the old ones. I did say the Slaughterhouse 9 were in Brockton Bay to recruit their 9th member, and that Alec would be considered for the spot. That was technically correct, although when I made the prediction, I was thinking just Alec. But I'll give myself it anyway.
Yeah, I think I'm gonna. I think that the community will rule in your favor on this one.
Right. And then also I was right about the glasses around Shatterbird. That was correct, and I'm proud of myself for that one. So good job, me.
Excellent.
So the new ones I'm going to make, I think we've already touched on these throughout, but I'm just going to recap them. I think Hookwolf is going to be the one of the recruits that ends up actually joining the Slaughterhouse 9. I'm assuming that next arc will be the tests and all that conflict that comes up, but I think at the end of that it will be him. And then on my weird speculation about Noel being the result of a cauldron experimentation to attempt to create an Endbringer-like person. Again, that's a out of left field one, and I have no idea. I have very little evidence to back that up, just weird thinking. So we'll see. Did I make another one? I can't remember.
I don't.
I think that was it.
You may have made another one, but we'll catch it.
All right.
We'll catch it.
All right. So that's all I got for this week.
All right. Well, yeah, that wraps up Arc 11 Infestation in its entirety over the last 2 podcasts.
Done.
I hope everyone enjoyed our discussion and hearing Scott's reactions to this nightmare. As always, we appreciate your feedback, and we're always trying to improve. So let us know if you have any advice, questions, or thoughts on this week's episode. Yeah, you can reach us via email at gotwormpod@gmail.com or on Twitter at gotwormpod. My personal Twitter is at ScottDaly85, that's DALY, and Matt's is at MoreDinamail. Please follow us. I've been trying to be more active on Twitter, giving my thoughts on films I've seen. One of these is I'm going to get back to writing film reviews. I haven't done that in a long time, but for now I'm going to tweet about them. So yeah, go and follow us. Yeah, I live tweeted my weekend watching back-to-back watching Batman vs Superman, Justice League. Wait, that is the Justice League movie. Suicide Squad. And X-Men Apocalypse. I can't believe you did that all in one weekend. You are a superhero. Mm-hmm. Well, I'm broken, just like Amy. So yeah. So if you're not already subscribed to We've Got Worm, we strongly recommend that you do so and never miss an episode. You can find us on iTunes, Stitcher, YouTube, Google Play, Overcast, and pretty much anywhere else in the world that you can listen to podcasts. And as always, you can find this, all the other podcasts we do, and all of our writing, essays, film and TV criticism, and more, which I promise I'm going to start doing again soon, at dailyplanetfilms.com. We also have a Patreon page, patreon.com/dailyplanetfilms, again, DALY. Thanks for your support. We've hit our next goal, and we're in the process of planning that worm fan art contest that we've been talking to you guys about for a while now. Yay. Make sure you stay tuned for more information on that in the coming weeks while we get that sorted out. Our next goal will be the return of the Daily Planet Book Club, which will be a monthly series where Matt and Scott tackle a book of the audience's choosing and discuss it. So check out the Patreon page for more info. A very special thanks to our new associate producer donor, Thinker6, and our new producer donors, Sammy R. and Jason R. We are continually awed by the level of your generosity, and we thank you guys so much for your support. While you're over at Patreon, make sure you stop by Wildbow's page and toss some money there, because he's the guy that makes this whole thing possible. Yeah, and as always, if you are one of those that can't spare any extra cash, we do completely understand. There are still tons of ways to help us out. You could share this podcast with your friends, people who have read Worm before, people who haven't read Worm before. I think we're trying to make this for both of those groups. And as always, if you're listening via iTunes, if you could take a minute to rate and review our podcast, that would be really helpful. This week's Spotlight review is from King Bob 12, who says, Matt and Scott are a tag team of in-depth speculation, writing savvy, and passion that is hard to beat.
hugely interactive with their audience, and also just perfectly on point with their examinations of Worm. If you've ever wanted to read Worm but were put off for whatever reasons, I have no idea why that would be true, but whatever. Or have already read Worm and want to get some more amazing content, listen to these guys. That's awesome because a lot of the points he hit in there are things we are specifically trying to do. So the fact that people are picking up on that, I think the audience interaction, I think, is really important for both of us. So thank you so much, King Bob. You're awesome. And thank you everyone else who has rated and reviewed us. We really appreciate it.
Yes, and in case you were wondering if we're delighted to receive that kind of feedback, we are delighted to receive that kind of feedback.
It makes me so happy. Just reading it again, I've already read it several times, but just reading it again right then just put a smile on my face.
Yeah, me too. So next week, we jump into Arc 12, Plague. So Scott, what do you think the title for this arc means?
Well, I think since the majority of the back half of Arc 11 was a setup for the Slaughterhouse 9, I suspect that the conflict will come to the forefront as their recruitment campaign becomes like a plague on the city, like a plague on both your houses.
Okay.
Something.
All right. Alrighty. Yeah. So next this coming weekend, Scott and I, along with a friend of the pod, Michael Grubb, are going to be traveling to a remote, undisclosed mountain location to work on a project together. So the schedule may be a bit messed up, but we are going to do our best regardless of that.
Yeah, this is really exciting, guys, because I don't know if you know this, but Matt and I haven't seen each other in a decade.
That's correct.
We were friends in high school or college. Then we both graduated from college and have not seen each other in human flesh for a long time.
Yeah.
So we're finally getting to do that.
Yeah, and I if you were under the apprehension that we're sitting in the same room doing this,
well,
then that's incorrect.
That means our video or our audio editing is spot on. Good.
Yeah, right. Yeah. So we would love to record something when we're there in the same place, but the timing might not work out there. But
we're going to try to record something. I don't know if it's going to be worm related or not. I don't want to promise anything and then disappoint people. But if it is worm related, it'll be a bonus type of thing. It will not be the normal episode face to face, unfortunately, because we will not be ready for it at that point. But yeah, we'll try to do something for sure.
Yeah. All right. So I think that wraps everything up, and we will see you guys next week.
Bye-bye.